I agree. He deserves a ton of blame. I think he also deserves a ton of praise. So I will come back to that in a sec. I think if Leon reread my column and then reread his comment, I think he would realize that there's actually no disagreement. So here's the I'll just pull out one paragraph of my article yesterday, which I think is what Leon alludes to, and it was my attempt to pinpoint where things went wrong. So because I don't know if there was one point where it all went wrong. There were just a bunch of things that just started stacking up on top of each other, and it made the situation worse, much like adding a fuel to the fire. But my paragraph read as this quote: "Whatever way you spin it, it is a sad ending for Bale at Real Madrid. To be sure, it was going to be sad regardless of the outcome, whether China, Tottenham, or an extended uncongenial stay in Madrid. You have to reverse engineer this scenario multiple years to trace the initial spoiling point. You could perhaps pinpoint one pivotal moment which started to distance all involved parties. Bale's appearance against Barcelona in April of 2017 in a pivotal game. Bale missed about a month of football before returning just in time for that Clásico. He played 60 minutes in the La Liga game as a warm-up prior, then limped off the field in the Clásico after 28 minutes. Up until that point, Bale was riddled with injuries, but on that particular day, things started to boil. Zidane's frustration was that this was a permanent issue. Bale was not available, even when he was. You could not rely on him. All his football was played with the Welsh national team, and little was left of him in between those stints. Whoever's fault it was a discouraging reality to deal with." So I think that's just kind of, it doesn't necessarily boil down to only that moment. It's a lot of things just stacked up against each other. I think that day was extra frustrating for everybody because it was like, okay, he's going to be back in time for the Clásico. We need him. We're going to rush him back.
Yeah.
And then it's like, we thought you were good. Why are you limping off after 28 minutes? We got to burn a sub now. This sucks. It was a huge game. And so I just pinpointed that as a potential frustration point. But I think, so it was interesting to read, I guess, the interpretation of the entire article yesterday, Lucas. And most people really enjoyed it. I'll just leave it there without elaborating too much on that. There were one or two people who thought it was insulting because a lot of the article was just kind of remembering Bale for these last few years and what he was. I think I think this is where it gets, and this is Leon Savernakis does not fall into this category. Now I'm talking about just a different thing here, but I think it gets really dangerous when people are too extreme in what their opinions about a player. So this happens with a lot of players, not just Bale, right? We've seen this a lot. I think Isco and James, those two particularly, either have people who hate them or love them. Yeah. And if
Benzema for sure also.
Benzema's another one for sure. And like if you love Isco, it's like you're not allowed to love James and vice versa. It's a very weird paradox that people fall into. And it's like you can only see the good of a player and never the bad if you love them, and vice versa. And so I think with Bale, it's like there was a lot of polarizing comments. Mostly people who don't like him at this stage of his career because they've just grown tired of him. But a lot of people who just are just stuck in this idea of like, how dare you say anything about him? He's won us multiple titles, big games. Obviously, I touched all that in my column too. It goes without saying, 4 goals in major finals, memorable ones, incredible stuff all around, incredible stats. The analytics on him are through the roof during his first 2-3 years at Real Madrid. But then there's the other camp that's like, well, how dare you like bring up that stuff? Like Bale was apathetic and all that. Like, so there's like, for some reason, there's no room in between. And I think we have to just bring up all of it. Like, what I hope we'll all remember the good of bad. And that tends to happen when players leave or they retire 10 years after the fact. We remember their good stuff, right? Like rarely do we talk about Guti maybe having bad moments. I know you and I actually disagree on this a little bit. I think you're much higher on Guti than I am. But you don't understand my point, right? Like we generally tend to remember the good more than the bad when players leave after, like when we reflect back on it. But I think there's room for both. Like the reality was, Bale in the last 2 years, he just mopes around the pitch at times. You can go back and watch the film. It's just like, I would rather have Rodrigo there in those especially this last year, but in the last 2 years, I would rather have given those minutes to Rodrigo and Asensio when it's like, because they're actually going to run. They're going to be taking shots in 40 yards. They're going to be taking players on. Bale, it's like you look at him, he's a freaking unicorn physically. Like he looks like somebody sculpted him like a Greek god and put a statue on the field. He's tall. He's incredibly athletic. He is just insanely chiseled. And then he gets the ball, and it's like, okay, there's a winger there in front of him, a defender there. He could probably burn that player. There's no one even covering on that defender to like send help. And or he could cut in and shoot. And it's like, okay, he has those two options, and peak Bale would have done something. But this version of Bale would just get the ball and then pass it backwards to like Dani Carvajal or Sergio Ramos or Rafael Varane or Modric or somebody. And it's like, oh, bro, but anyone can do that. I could do that. Obviously, I can't actually do that in the game. I'd probably be shitting my pants. but like Lucas Vazquez could do that. So if you're going to be Bale, like, what are you going to bring to the table? Are we just doing backward passes here? And you know, like, you do a lot of good work defensively, but so does Rodrigo, so does Lucas Vazquez, so does Marco Asensio. Maybe not so much, but at times he at least works hard. So that was my biggest issue with Bale, is like, we appreciate all the stuff, and nobody loved Bale more than I did. Nobody. I would get people being like, man, why do you defend Bale so much? But these last 2 years, he's been a shadow of that, and a lot of it is on him. Like, he just chose to be a different kind of player, and maybe injuries got in his head, and he was scared to go into challenges. But man, we have to analyze this accurately, and to analyze it accurately, we have to look at the good and the bad. In the last 2 years, it's just been apathy. He doesn't care. So,
yeah,
I hope he does well. That's it.
100%, 100%.